The broadcast is now starting.
Hello everyone, happy Thursday, happy almost end of June, almost beginning of July, beginning of summer kind of time frame, and welcome to the latest edition of the PixelMill Webinar Series and today's offering of content that delivers tips to create awesome and accessible SharePoint pages and news. Oh man guys, this is going to be a slobber knocker of a session, and I don't use that term lightly, but we're very excited to have this one today. If this is your first time joining us on one of our PixelMill webinars, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us and have a little fun. If this is your second, third, 25th and a half webinar you've been on with us, thank you so much for coming back. We really appreciate having you guys there. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep track of when we post these videos. We do post recaps on our blog, but if you're mostly just interested in the replay and the video part, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep track of that. A couple quick webinar things. If you have any questions or comments, there is a questions tab and a chat tab. You should be able to pop those out and put those questions and comments in there. I will be keeping track of those all throughout the session, so I'll make sure I get that stuff to our speakers so we can make sure we get your questions answered. But enough about me, enough about that. Let's get to the session today. Our speaker comes all the way from Bethesda, Maryland. The fact that I just learned 20 minutes ago. She's a Microsoft MVP, and she's pretty much the coolest person I've ever met. Susan Hanley, take it away.
Oh my God, with that kind of an introduction, now I don't even know how to begin. So I guess we'll begin at the beginning. So we're going to talk about sort of how to create accessible and awesome SharePoint pages, and try and speak slowly and clearly, but if I go too fast, Michael, you will warn me that I'm going too fast. So let me first share a little bit about my personal journey. Let's see if I can get the slides to advance. And what made me really care about this a lot. So for people who don't know me, I'm an information architect and a business analyst, and I've been a consultant for my entire career. Big firms, small firms, and for the past 15 years, I've been an independent consultant with my own company. And I do a lot of conference presentations, and I do a lot of training, and I do a lot of designing of intranets. So as an information architect, I really care about organizing and presenting information. And as a business analyst, I care enormously about generating business value. But for the last couple of years, I've been on a journey that affects both sides of the work that I do, driven by some personal and professional experiences. And by the way, I cannot wait until we can get back to in-person events. Right now,
definitely.
The person I'm seeing is Michael, and so I need I love the feedback that I get from people when I'm talking. I usually fixate on one or two people, and if they're happy, I'm happy.
Hey, Sue, I'm going to join you.
All right, good.
Oh, hey everybody. I failed to mention that also my co-host for today is President co-founder PixelMill, Eric Overfield. He'll be on the call today as well.
Visual cue. Sorry, Sue,
Awesome.
go ahead.
Right. So yeah, so just to explain sort of why did I get focused on this? So on the personal side, 3 years ago, I had a milestone birthday. And the next year, two really big things happened. So one is I became a grandmother for the first time. And my little Hannah is now a little over 2. And I think the first travel I will probably do since the pandemic is to visit her in LA, because I really could care less about my kids anymore because now I have a granddaughter. The second thing that happened is my 40th college reunion. So if there's ever two things that are reminding you that you're getting older, believe me, those two things can totally do it. So what does all that have to do with SharePoint and accessibility? Well, for me, it served to focus my attention on things that are important to me. And it got me thinking about two kind of important professional values. And one of them is time, which is a very scarce resource, not just for people in my age bracket, of course, but for everyone in every organization. In fact, I think time is the scarcest resource of all. And as an information architect, I try to design solutions that will basically not focus on how many clicks does it take to get to content, but what's the minimal, how can I minimize the time it takes for you to get to the answer or the destination that you're looking for. And the other thing that I think is particularly important to me, especially because things happen to you as you're getting older, like you can't see very well and you have to wear glasses that you didn't have to wear before. The other thing is really inclusion. And this is not just about age or diversity, which is all critically important, and we're all kind of focused on this. But and although aging has kind of heightened my awareness of both of these issues. The inclusion has really captured my attention because it's something I can use the platform that I have, teaching and presenting and designing, to address. So, you know, everybody can make their impact in big ways if they can, but I think there are some little ways that we can make a difference in how people experience the solutions that we build and to make them more inclusive. So as I said, I'm really massively interested and massively aware how important it is to deliver business value. But in order to do that, it's not just the design of our intranets that need to deliver value, but it's really every single page. And every page needs to be both inclusive and deliver value. And so here's what inspired my time and inclusion and value journey, the professional side. I read Satya Nadella's book, and in it he talks a little bit about being a father of a special needs son, and his son is legally blind. And a lot of what he writes about made me really focus on what must that be like. And then shortly after that, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal about people suing websites because their sites are not accessible to people who are blind. And then I listened to a phenomenal episode of the Intrazone in which Chris and Mark had Lauren Back, who's a blind usability engineer, who talked about the things that each one of us can do as content creators and developers to help people with visual disabilities. And the sort of last part of my recent journey was probably the best session I attended at Ignite, and I really feel bad that it wasn't recorded, but because it was led by a woman named Heben Girma, who is a deaf-blind woman who graduated from Harvard Law School. And if you weren't there, I will tell you that you missed a profound opportunity to listen, and people were able to come up and interact with her. It was a fascinating way to look at the world from a different perspective. And so, as I said, I'm not the only person focused on that, and I think it's an important value for Microsoft as well. And so it's our job, I think, to do what we can to manage time for people, everyone in the organization, and make sure that the content and the pages that we create in our sites, and most of my world lives in SharePoint, to make sure that we recognize all of that and pay attention to it. And honestly, it doesn't take a lot of work, and anything that you do to make your pages more inclusive is going to help everybody. So I'm going to ask you guys to come on the journey with me and make it your 2020 mission to focus on how can we do better with the content that we create for everyone, not just old people like me or people who are visually impaired, but really everyone who uses our solutions. So the first thing I'd like to do is talk about a sobering fact to begin our discussion. I don't care what kind of pages you have, but your SharePoint pages are not getting read. I mean, they're not getting read by anyone, to be honest with you. And we are spending a lot of time, I know, counting things like which pages people have clicked on, because it's actually very easy to get that kind of usage data. But, you know, just because someone read your page is not the same as getting value from your page. We mistake clicking with actually reading, because just because they click on it doesn't also mean they're reading it. And there's some data to basically tell us that your pages are just not getting read. And if anything's being read, it's things that are at the top of the page. And, you know, this concept of top has changed on all of us. Top is very different when I'm looking at a big giant screen or a little teeny phone. And so the fact of the matter is that whether your page is an article, a news article, or a web page, your pages are just not getting read. And of course, that's really because we don't, as people, we don't read on the web. We actually skim and we scan. And that means that simply creating pages are not going to get us the engagement outcomes that we want. We need to write articles and create content that our readers are going to connect with, you know, get their company tattoo, I love my company. And more importantly, they're going to take action, not just one reader, but all of the readers. And the first tip I want to share is if you're creating content in written form, the first thing you want to think about is that you should always write upside down. Now, it really doesn't mean that you are upside down. What it really means is that every page of content that you create should have the most important information. What I need in order to get the most out of that page, what I need to be successful and take the right action has to be at the top of the page, wherever top turns out to be. Anything below the top is sort of ancillary information that is kind of nice to know but not need to know. And when you think about how newspaper articles are written, that's actually a tip that we can take from journalists. In school, we're taught to write, a topic sentence, 3 supporting things, and then a conclusion at the end. So what you really want to do is flip and have your conclusion at the beginning, more like journalists write content than term papers that we learn how to write in college. This applies no matter who is reading your content. If you want to make your writing even more accessible, don't do some of these things and do some of these other things. So don't only use color when you're trying to highlight terms. Use color, avoid using only colors are going to make it much, much harder for people. Now, color can be helpful, but when you use color, think carefully about who might be reading your page and whether the contrast in the color that you're using is going to be, they're going to be able to understand that that color actually means something. Another little tip that I did not know is that it's helpful to put a period in each letter in an abbreviation, because that helps a screen reader know that it's reading an acronym. And then watch the language that you use as you're creating your content. Things like, don't say things like "see the instructions." That's not a part of a very inclusive vocabulary. So be really careful and think about who's reading your page. And try to make the content on it not only most important things at the top, but the way that you write it and the attributes that you use. Make sure that they're accessible as well. One way to make your pages and content more readable is to use all the creative things that you can do in SharePoint to make your pages more interesting. So first thing you want to do is chunk your content, break it up, use sections to break up the content. One of the reasons you want to do that is that when you use columns on SharePoint pages, that is going to dictate how those pages respond on a mobile phone. And so each section is responsive within the section. And basically the way things work, it's top to bottom, section 1, then section 2, then section 3, and then within a section, the way that pages respond is left to right, column by column. And so you have a lot of control, and you don't even have to worry about it because you're not designing, you don't have to worry about how to make the page responsive. What you have to think about is the user experience when that page responds. If you have a ton of content in a 2/3 area on the left and then ancillary content on the right, be aware that when you're on a mobile device, all that ancillary content, if you haven't used sections, is going to float to the bottom of the page. Another just thing to be aware of is if you use the vertical column on a SharePoint page, that always floats to the bottom in a narrow screen width. So think about how your pages are going to look. Break up the content to make it more readable, but also think about breaking it up to be more responsive. My most important tip, and I've been nailing people on the project that I'm working on right now, is use built-in header styles to take advantage of 2 things. Number 1, the ability to make an on-page anchor link, but also because a screen reader uses those headers to be able to skip from section to section. So you can help someone who uses a screen reader scan your page if you're breaking your content up using heading links. My other little tip is don't use heading 2 just because you like the font size and it aligns to what the web part title looks like. You can write text in a larger font without using a header to do that. And the reason you want to do that is that the screen reader needs that header, and you want to make sure that you use headers in order. So you have an H1, and then within that you have an H2 and an H3. Don't start with an H2 because that's going to be confusing. Where's the H1? So again, The biggest tip I can give you here is use headings, use those heading text to separate your sections, but if all you want is a larger font, edit the font size, don't use a heading to just get a larger font. So heading styles, blah, 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 we already went over that. I'm actually not gonna play this, but this, the slides, I don't know if you noticed in the beginning, I have a link to the slides. I'll show it again at the end. When you download the slides, you wanna go listen to this podcast. It's really worth listening to, and some really great tips to think about how you can create things that are so easy to do if we just think about them. Great advice from someone who does need a screen reader, so she'll tell you exactly what you need to do. So all right, I'm gonna skip that. Okay, so want to make your page more interesting? Use some of the more interesting web parts. So I work with someone who is just crazy about the countdown timer. It's really great, works really well if there's something to count down to. Be careful about things like this though, because when the date that you're counting down to is past, that countdown timer has much less value on your page. So you have to pay attention sometimes to the web parts that you use. The way that that quick links web part, which is what I call the unfortunately named quick links web part, because honestly, if a link isn't quick, why are we using it? Shouldn't all links be quick? But that particular web part, which I really love, has a whole lot of different layout styles that you can use to get creative and make your page more engaging. So web parts really help make your page more interesting. And if you really want to be inspired, take a look at the lookbook at lookbook.microsoft.com, because what you'll see is really interesting ways that the designers at Microsoft have demonstrated to use various web parts. And you don't have to do exactly what they're doing, but you can use that to be inspired for what is the art of the possible. The other thing I like to do is move web parts around, because sometimes the layouts change based on the width of the web part, and you can create some different and more interesting experiences simply by moving things around in a different column width. So it's really worth looking at your page or getting someone who isn't you to look at your page to see, can I make this page experience more interesting? A couple other things that you really want to do is think about writing text that is scannable. So back to my original premise is that no one is reading your content. They are looking at your content, they're just not reading it word for word. So one thing you may want to think about is, how can I make my content more scannable? What I try to do is I try to highlight the key words in a paragraph using bold text. Never ever use underline to emphasize a point, because an underline on the web means a link. So if you are cutting and pasting, or if you have users who are cutting and pasting from a Word document, you got to convince them not to use underlines, that the way to make an emphasis is to use bold. Another important way to keep your paragraph scannable is to make sure there's only one idea per paragraph. Keep your paragraph short, and don't write full sentences. Bullets are perfectly fine because they make your content more scannable. And while we're talking about the topic of hyperlinks, this is probably my most important nit that I really go crazy when I see in an email or on a website. You use hyperlinks to link to ancillary or related content, but where should you put that hyperlink? Anywhere but under the word here. This will be your homework, by the way, to go back to your intranet and look at how many places you are connecting where the hyperlink is under the word here. Now, there's a really important reason for why we don't want to do that. Number one, really not fair to people who use a screen reader. The other reason, it's not fair to anyone, because again, I'm scanning your page. Every time I see a hyperlink under the word here, I have to read all your text before and all your text after the word to know where that target is. What you really want to do is put the hyperlink under the word that is the target. If you remember to do nothing else I say is really important today. If you remember one thing and one thing only, it's to make sure that you never, ever, ever again use click here. and that you blast that message to all of your colleagues and make sure that your intranet pages are not using click here's anywhere. That may make people annoying. All right, so a couple of things to think about when it comes to links. I'm not going to drain this slide because I have all the slides and we'll make them available to you. But in general, accessibility tips for links are also really good for anyone using your site. So you want to make sure that the text is unique, that the hyperlink is under the target word, that the link text is relatively short. You could link to a full sentence if it really makes sense, but never anything longer than that. And the other thing is, don't type out the entire URL, use a hyperlink so that your page is more readable. The other really cool thing that we can do is, rather than making someone go work for things that you want them to see, why don't you just embed them? So my favorite thing to embed, of course, is videos, and it's super easy to do that in SharePoint. Let's see if I can make this play. Because, right, you can basically stick a video in a text web part just by typing the URL, and magically a video web part right underneath of it will get automatically created on your behalf. So you don't even have to use the video web part. So rather than linking to video, why don't you embed the video on your page? That's what makes pages so cool and so much better than documents, because we can use these rich interactive elements to make them more interesting and engaging. And of course, from an accessibility perspective, how about linking to the transcript? A huge advantage of storing your videos in Stream is that you're going to get that automatic transcript. Oops. All right. So this tip is probably more important for news than any other kind of page. But that news web part is dependent on two things. One, a nice image, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But it's also dependent on the title, because that's what's going to make people want to read your article. So, you know, super long, boring titles are not necessarily going to grab the attention of your reader. So use these techniques to make sure that your pages have interesting and engaging titles. I read some data one time that titles that include numbers like 8 tips or 5 tips or whatever get like almost twice as much engagement as titles that don't. So think about how, even internally, when you're trying to get your news articles read, use the techniques that people use both on the web and in journalism to make sure that the title is interesting and engaging, and that will encourage people to click to see more. I'm going to take a breath here. Any questions, Michael?
All we've gotten so far are comments saying how much people love your session so far. So awesome job.
Nice things too. That's totally allowed. I like that too. Cool. All right. So now let me tell you the Sue Hanley issue with images. I love images on pages. What I don't like are what I call gratuitous images. There are a lot of web parts that call for images, like, again, my favorite but unfortunately named Quick Links web part. Great web part, horrible name. However, the grid layout allows you to have an image for each link. That is awesome, really love it. But the image that is not related to the topic is useless. Because if I have to read the text anyways, what is your image doing for me? Absolutely nothing. So you want to use an image that has something to do with your content. A couple of great ways to get relevant images. First of all, don't knock yourself out. If you can't find relevant images, choose another way to display links. Links do not have to have images if you can't find one that speaks to your topic. But if you can, yes, the image is super helpful. If you can't, don't do it. So I'll give you an example. So I was working with a client and we were making a site for global IT. And the most important thing, we had done all the user analysis on what do people need from IT. They actually don't really care about how you're organized. They don't want your org chart or anything like that. They don't even care who's the head of it. What they really want is, how do I get IT help? So we know that's the most important concept. So the team knew that has to be on top. And they wanted it to have an image, the link to getting IT help, and the image that they chose were cherry blossoms. And I looked at it and said, well, nothing about the pain I'm in when I need IT help speaks to cherry blossoms. Maybe we should pick an image that has something relatable to what is going on with me. So, something calm and soothing related to getting IT help is just not doing it for me. I know a lot of people like to use that easy button. Well, something like that, anything that relates to the topic is better than something that has nothing to do with the topic. And when all else fails, guess what? If I have to read the words anyways, make a button. Totally fine. You can just use the words. So the real question is, where do we get these great images from? Because we want images that are, high enough resolution to look good, and we want them to be topical. So and relevant. Okay, so one is if you're working in an organization that has a collection of brand approved images and the brand police are going to get really mad if you don't use one of those images, then that is a great reason to create an organizational assets site and put all your images there. You can just create a regular SharePoint site. I'll give you a very good suggestion for the name. Call it org assets and create document libraries in that site, and those libraries are where you want to put your brand images and create a separate library for logos. The reason you want to do that is when you use an image from brand assets, your org assets library, it doesn't actually live in your site. SharePoint will magically create a CDN for you, and that image is going to be called in a very performant way from the CDN every time you use it. And it won't live in your site. So if you lose the right to use that image, and that actually happened to us one time, or you have a logo that gets changed, you change it in one place and it filters everywhere where people have been using it. So it's really, really a great idea. You configure an organizational assets site using magical PowerShell. So easy enough that a grandmother can do it. So I have no technical skills whatsoever. And yes, I'm able to do enough PowerShell to make an org asset site. Another great thing that popped into all of our tenants about a month ago is Microsoft's collection of maybe roughly 14,000 stock images. And what's nice about the stock images is that they're searchable. Your org assets library, unfortunately, is not very searchable because there's really not much you can do to organize those assets other than to put them in folders. It's kind of a big fail. They should be a little more searchable. But in the meantime, the stock images are great. And if you don't like those, there's a bunch of websites where you can get royalty-free images that are also searchable. So if you can find an image that's more related to your topic. However, when you're going to use an image, this is probably the one, besides click here, here's the one other thing I want you to commit to doing. Every image that you use on your site should have alt text. If you're in SharePoint Online, Microsoft is actually trying to interpret what your image is using artificial intelligence. So it'll give you a suggestion. I would say most of the time, they're not particularly relevant, but sometimes they nail it. On the stock images, there will be alt text, so they're more likely to be correct. But all you have to do, a pop-up comes up. It's 2 seconds to click it and make sure that the alt text is there for every single image. So really important, because when a screen reader encounters an image, it's going to attempt to read the text alternative. But you know what? Not just for accessibility, because if someone is connecting to your site over low bandwidth, browsers show the alt text when the images don't load. So really, really important. This is just, it's something that every one of us can do, and it costs us nothing to add the alt text to our images. So I'm not going to tell you I'm perfect about doing this, because sometimes I forget, and when I'm in a hurry, of course, it's a little extra time, and if there's a lot of images on the page, it's a lot of work. But on the other hand, it really is just a smart thing to do. It's probably one of the easiest and most inclusive things we can do. And again, 2 seconds of our time and super valuable to our colleagues. So I won't read this to you. I'll have you guys take a look at it. But you may be wondering, what should I put in alt text? And so this is a good list of sort of what works in your alt text or text alternative field on your SharePoint pages. Okay, I'll breathe here. Any questions, comments?
Perfect. I was trying to find a good spot to interrupt you. Yes, we did get a question in. This CDN approach is specific only to Office 365, correct?
Eric? Yeah, I think so. The org assets site is an Office 365, or it is a Microsoft 365 feed.
That's as far as I know.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, as far as you know, yeah. And I think the org assets library, of course, then would only be available to you in SharePoint Online, not in SharePoint 2019. Is that right?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. I don't play with 2019 enough.
I know, this is funny. I mean, I have only one client with SharePoint 2019, so I am just not there enough either. Another good reason to move to the.
Exactly. We also had another question come in. Do you know if org assets can be consumed directly into Word, PowerPoint, etc.?
I believe that is the intention, that you would also store in that same site your Word and PowerPoint templates. And I think there's a magical PowerShell script you can run to do that. That, again, might be a teeny bit above my pay grade, but I've seen where that is. So I'll give you like another tip. So completely off topic. But because I haven't been traveling during the pandemic, I had a little extra time on my hands, and I was given the opportunity to do a project for Microsoft to work on updating all of the documentation in docs.microsoft.com about planning and designing and building modern intranets. And I think there's about a dozen new articles on intranets and 2 on governance. The intranet ones went live already, and the governance ones are going to go live in a week or 2. If you want more information about can you do that, I know there's a docs.microsoft.com article about using org assets for Word templates. That is I actually discovered things when I was working for Microsoft on this project that I had no idea existed, like incredible guidance. So I highly recommend that I won't say that it's super easy to find all of these things. And sometimes when you find an article, if you look on the left, there's a table of contents related to the topic that may or may not be everything that you need, but I will tell you that there's a lot of really helpful documentation that Microsoft has produced. And when you do find the article that you need, they're incredibly well written. So I would really encourage you to bingle to find some of that content, because I think you'll find some answers there. And it was a Docs article that I read that had something to do with Word and PowerPoint templates in the org assets library. Right. Anything else?
That's it for now. Back to you.
That's a great question. When you bingle the answer, let us know. All right. So a couple other things that you can do to give your articles, at least your news articles, some street cred. You know, there's really 2 kinds of pages in SharePoint. One is a regular site page, and that's the one that builds your sites, your communication site or your team sites for that matter. And then there's another kind of site, which is the one that lives inside the news web part, or is exposed inside the news web part. Behind the scenes, they're just pages that live in the site pages library. There's an important thing you need to know about these pages, is that the way to distinguish whether a page is news or regular is by an attribute called promoted state. And promoted state is a modern attribute, which means you will not be able to add it to views until you are in the site pages library and you click plus show hide columns, and then or add columns, scroll down to show hide columns, and then you'll see all the modern attributes. You have to add it to your view from the modern interface, and then you can use it in the classic view edit. And the reason you want to know that is that because that will help you identify whether a page is part of news or whether it's part of your regular site pages library. So I almost always switch the view of the site pages library to be all pages. I add promoted state and version to that view. I add a few other things as well, and all those things are listed in the slide here. And then I choose to group by promoted state. And promoted state equals 0 is a site page, promoted state equals 2 is a news article, and promoted state equals 1 is a news article that you have never published. And so that grouping actually helps you manage your pages at the back end. A little off-topic tip. If you're going to use the Microsoft Multilingual feature, you will not only want to create this view, but you will want to create a similar view with no folders. And the reason you want to do that is that you want to be able to find all the pages that are related to one another, where the main page will be in the root of the site pages library, and the foreign translations or the other translations will be in folders. And if you create a no folders view with those same attributes, you could effectively publish all the related pages at the same time, see the status of the pages in the main language and the alternate languages very, very easily. So again, it's not the only view that you'll want, but it'll be a really helpful view. All right. So back to organizational news. That is another superpower that you can add, again, with PowerShell to your site. When you enable a site with the brand new home site superpower, you don't have to worry about this because that site will magically become a company news site or an organizational news site. You can have as many organizational news sites as you want, and one of the reasons you want to do this is it gives your articles a visual pop. And you can see Asia Pacific region is from a site called Asia Pacific region. That is not an organizational news site. News at Contoso gets that little banner. The banner shows up anywhere that news article is pulled in any roll up. It shows up on the SharePoint start page. It shows up in the mobile app, and the color it takes on is based on the theme of the site that you are on. So it isn't always blue. Your theme will be reflected, but that little article gets a little bit of a pop because you're designating it as coming from a site that is super important. And again, this only works for news pages, but it's another way to sort of make your news pages even more important. The other thing you can do, which I think is critically important for any kind of page, is to show me things that are important to me. And I want to talk a little bit about audience targeting, because although it is a phenomenally interesting feature, it is not phenomenally easy to understand how it is implemented. So I'm going to just describe my order of operations for audience targeting. To target content, you need to have a group that is targetable, if you will. And you can target a Microsoft 365 group. Right now, the screen actually does still say Office 365, but at some point that will get renamed as well. So groups, Office 365 groups are now being called Microsoft 365 groups. So you need an existing Microsoft 365 group, or a mail-enabled security group, or a regular old AD security group. And audiences can be any of these kind of groups except for a DL. So this is the screen that you would say if you were creating this from Azure. That's step one, have a group. Step two, you have to turn on audience targeting in the library that respects it, and that is the site pages library. What will happen when you do that is that you will get an additional column in the site pages library that you can then use in views, and it will also show up in the attributes of every page in your site. Step three is to turn on audience targeting in one of the two web parts where audience targeting is supported. And those are news and highlighted content. So have a group, turn on site pages, and then and only then will audience targeting be available in your web parts. However, none of this matters until you actually target a page using the audience. And so the last thing that you're going to do is, as you create pages, you will say, for whom is this page most relevant? And so when you do such a thing and you use one of those two web parts, you will see two different views. Again, I use every opportunity to have a gratuitous picture of the grandchild in all the slides. So here's one image with Hannah, and then here's this view shows an article that is the same article I showed on the previous page that is being targeted to people who work in California, the California team. So they'll see this, but everybody else will see the same web part, but they won't see that article. That article, if I knew how to search for it, or if someone sent me a URL link to it, I would 100% be able to see it, because audience targeting is not security. It only works with security if the site that is hosting the content is also restricted to me. And so what's nice about this is it enables you to show people the content, either pages or news, that is most relevant to them. But again, it's not the same as securing that content. So I'll take a little breath here and make sure nobody has any questions about that. Because this pardon me?
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. So by the way, while you're creating your audiences, there's something else that you can do with them now. And that is that you can use that same audience to target navigation. And so whether you're using a team site or a communications site, the other new capability is that we can use these same audiences to target links in the navigation. And if you're in the audience, you see the link. And if you're not in the audience, you don't see the link. So it's a really cool thing that we can do to make sure that people see content that is most relevant to them. And by the way, targeting is also respected on the mobile app and in the SharePoint start page. Okay, sorry, Mike Lord. Any questions?
Nothing just yet. Doing a great job.
I think that's a really good description of audience targeting. It's so clear.
It really was. That was great.
Almost every client we work with has that, so I'm sure that that's resonating with everybody.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I had to explain it to a client 2 days ago because honestly, it's extremely confusing conceptually. And what they were struggling with, which is really, which I had not really thought about, is the difference between following and targeting. Because that it's a very different experience. Following a site is a control that you as the end user make. So it's something that you can choose to customize your experience. Whereas targeting is something that the page creator and the site designer do in order to create a more personalized experience for you. So you get to choose what you're following, and what that does is it promotes news. Basically, it does two things. It promotes news from those sites to your news feed, which is visible in the mobile app and on the SharePoint start page. It also creates a very easy way for you to get back to sites that are important to you. So on the SharePoint start page, it allows you, if you followed a site, to create a custom experience that is just for you on that page. So I always like to say that the SharePoint start page is the information architect's best friend, because no matter how much I screw up navigation, you can get back to the sites that you care about by following them or by visiting them, because there's another pivot on the SharePoint start page that shows you the sites that you've gone to most recently. So even if I don't get navigation 100% correct, you have an opportunity to customize that experience for you. And you know, modern intranets aren't just about what we push to you, it's also about what you control on the experience that is targeted to you. So you get a little bit of sort of customization. The other thing we can do to create even better user experiences, and although this is probably not really related to accessibility, but two things that I really love. One is coming very, very soon, which is the ability to choose when a page goes live. And this is just something that every CorpCom person really, really wants. You want to publish an article. What you're going to do, very, very important, leave it in an unpublished state, because the minute you publish an article, it's visible to everyone. You want to leave it unpublished and schedule a date and time for it to be published. This is a feature we used to have, but when you do that, the page will go live at that date and time that you asked it to go live, which is great. And then the other thing you can do to ensure that your pages look similar is to create a page template. And that will make it easier for people to create new pages following your best practices. Sure, you can use one of Microsoft's built-in pages, but if you have other things that you want to make sure that every page has in it, and again, contextually, there may be sites where you really want every page to have a similar structure, creating a custom page template is going to just make it easier for people who are creating pages to do it in a really good way. And my little tip is follow what Microsoft does on those pages. Embed all your training right into the template. And that way, it's much harder to make a mistake. It's much easier to kind of follow the guidelines or pay attention to governance or build accessible pages if the instructions are right in the template. So in the template, if you're going to embed an image web part, have a little tip in the caption that says, replace this caption with meaningful text and don't forget to add an alt text for the image. So there's a lot of things you can do to just help people build more accessible pages without worrying about sort of thinking about it every single minute.
Hey, Sue, a good question came in kind of to follow up on this. So where is it? Here it is. So scheduling is great. What about expiring the content?
Well, all right. So that I don't believe that's part of the scheduling feature, but I'll tell you how you can fake it till you make it. One thing you can do is that you can build an attribute called, I usually call it show until. And then in my news web part, I will say, I will have a filter that says, you know, show until, as long as filter where show until, and I have to think about if I use greater than or less than, is greater than or equal to today. And that way, once I've taken that off, you know, if that filter is no longer met, then that article won't be shown. Honestly, I'm not quite sure I totally need that really, because, you know, the most number of news articles, it really applies to news more than anything else. The most number of articles you can show on a given page is 12. And that's if you use the hub layout and you stick it in a single column zone. The minute you publish your 13th article, it's not on the home page anyway. You're going to have to go to see all to see it. So while there is technically no way to do it, you could probably do it with a flow that you create in Power Automate, but there's no sort of out of the box, there's no field that says delete me after. And again, but there's a lot of ways, if that outcome is important, you know, one thing about SharePoint, there's almost always a way to get an outcome. So, and also when Microsoft introduces new features, sometimes they try to release things as quickly as possible. So you get a V1 before you necessarily get a, this is everything we would love to see in this web part. So it's a great question.
Awesome.
All right, so these basically are my tips. So number one, most important thing, write your content upside down. Use sections and web parts to make your pages, to allow the built-in responsiveness to work for your audience. You know, just because SharePoint Online is responsive by design, SharePoint 2019 as well, modern pages are responsive by design. That doesn't absolve you of thinking as a page author about how that responsive experience is going to play out for your users. Make sure your text is scannable. Don't make me work for your content. Embed things that I need to see. Video content is what I really mean here. Make sure your page title is meaningful. Don't use gratuitous images. Create an organizational news. Give sites that have org news, the organizational news superpower, and use your targeting capabilities where it makes sense to target pages so that I'm looking at content that is most relevant to me. And that, so I'm going to basically, that's kind of the main part of my talk. And I just want to share a couple other sort of extra tidbits. Number one, if you want the slides, and you will want them for the next page that I'm going to show you, this is where they are, and I'll put this back up in a second after I give you a tour of what else is included. So as I said, I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of research about how to make I had this passion, and I was going to learn about how do I make my content, what can I do to make accessible pages? How can I make it easy for me to do? How can I make sure that I tell people this is not hard? This is super easy. So here's a bunch of the resources that I gathered. And the first one, of course, is an article that I just published. This came out in April in advance of Global Accessibility Day, which was May 21st of this year, about how to make your SharePoint pages more accessible. Unfortunately, you don't actually have to read it, but because we just talked about all of them in this and more in this. But if you wanted to see them all written in an easy place that you could share with your colleagues. And then these are really, really interesting articles. I found all of them particularly useful. You need a lot of time to take a look at them, but there is a whole bunch of different resources. And then this is really one of my favorites to help me figure out what is good alt text for images, because, you know, I wasn't doing it. I bet most of you weren't. What should be in the alt text, so you don't. So there are some really good ideas and examples, and that's really helpful. And then some data that really, if you don't believe me that this is important, here's some data that you can share with your colleagues to remind them how important this is. And then the last, remember I told you I would tell you what I do to make pages more manageable. And here's a few of those little tips about how I work with modern pages. I did a blog about this as well, but you can see there's two things I want to make sure I know. One is what type of page I am, promoted state, and what's the version. There is a little icon now that you can see on your pages when they're unpublished. Looks like a little golden book. But the other good way to tell is if the version number doesn't end in .0, your page is not published. So it helps visually to scan your pages and see what is going on. And then finally, a bunch of other little sort of tips to think about. You can unpublish a page if you want to. And again, what happens, how do you do that? So one little tip is make sure that you keep your pages, your major minor pages enabled for your sites so that you can take advantage of most of these new and existing features. So I'd put the slides back up. So again, this is how to get the slides. So that's all my content, and I'm here if people have questions.
Oh, and do we have questions? Okay, starting at the top here. There we go. Is it possible to create custom search pages with custom refiners on SharePoint Online Modern?
Yes, if you use the PNP solution. Eric?
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that? Is that the right answer?
Oh, it is an answer, and it's correct.
It is. Okay.
The right answer? I don't think there is a right answer. We have so many requests around customizing Microsoft Search. Sue, do you have any guidance you can share around that at all?
Well, I mean, I guess here's the thing. I think you need to decide what is important and how much time and energy and what kind of developers you have available, what kind of skills you have. Because, customizing search is kind of a spectrum. You can use out of the box. There are some things you can do natively to SharePoint Search that I really love and that not enough people take advantage of. Bookmarks. When you create a site, create a bookmark for it. Bookmarks are actually really awesome. Unfortunately, they only work when you're searching from the top of your tenant, but that's another story. So bookmarks, there's the locations feature, there's and sort of the natural language Q&A. All of this is native to the search tool. So you can do that. But if the real question is, how do I use metadata as a refiner? That's kind of the next level, which is the PNP solution that is really very much Microsoft supported. And there's pretty clear instructions for how to use it. And that would be, I really want to create a custom search experience in the context of a site. And that's a really good one. And then of course, the other way to customize search is to grow your own. And I think you can do all kinds of things with code, right, Eric?
Sure. Have you seen anything in particular people have done from your side, from the content side that you would prefer, that you would recommend?
I haven't seen anything that I like any better than others. I really want all of this to be first-party configurable, like it used to be. And so knowing the direction that Microsoft is taking, I'm excited that we will get more of that at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, there's so many questions here. Mike, I'm going to let you ask the next ones here, but on the search results pages, that's what I would say. So for those of you looking for PNP search results, probably be a good way to search for PNP search. I'm sure Google will tell you exactly how to go get that. Freely available open source project, as Sue said, very supported by, well, it's not endorsed. Microsoft's well aware that it's there and they do push people to it,
well,
but it's supported by the community.
They talked about it at Ignite. He promoted it in his search session at Ignite. So it's more than just, oh, we like this.
But they don't offer support for it. So if it breaks, don't call them. They're not going to talk to you about it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, it's sort of the known way. If you need to create a custom search in SharePoint that it has refiners, etc., that's the good solution. My biggest complaint right now is a comprehensive solution for the search bar up in the ribbon to be able to link to that. And that does not exist beyond at a site collection level, which is a real shame.
Next question.
I was thrilled by listening to you guys answer that question. All right, next question. So targeting is great and something to start using now, but how about tagging? Any recommendation about tagging content that could be related to targeting?
Can't target with a tag right now. So the tag would be useful as a refiner. So that goes back to the first question. But targeting is about audiences. And I went through how you create an audience. It's about membership in a particular group of people. So think of targeting as people related. Think of tagging as content related. Now, put the two together and you have a vision, which I would say is manifested or will be manifested soon in Project Cortex. So I would say watch this space, because it will just get better if Cortex is in your roadmap. And again, we know it's not gonna, well, yeah. I don't think the official pricing has been announced. We know it's not free. It won't come with E3. It'll be an add-on, we know that. But the more important thing is you need a combination of those two things. And obviously as an IA, I love tags. I love authoritative tags. I don't like user input tags because they never do it right or consistently, and we don't get a corpus of taggers that is really that statistically useful. That's my personal take on that. But again, they're not really the same thing. And where they come together, I think the first place we'll see that come together is in Cortex. Eric, do you have anything to add about that?
Nope.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. Quick break from questions, and this is more of a comment. PixelMill, please ask Susan for another session about Microsoft 365 information architecture. What goes where and how to organize it. So we can talk offline about that, but just in case you wanted to know, everyone loves you, wants you to come back.
I will tell you that. So I love to talk about IA. It is really hard to do in an hour. What would you talk about? Like, you know, so I do an all-day workshop on IA at all the SharePoint Fest conferences. So when they come back, I will be there with my all-day workshop on IA. I need at least a day to give you the basics. So it's really hard in an hour. That being said, let me see if I can find the link to the article that I wrote for Microsoft, because actually planning IA modern SharePoint, because I just updated that article.
Oh, cool.
And it's like tons of updates to that. So I wrote the original one and then did a massive update to all of the reference articles about IA. And so a lot of what I could do in a webinar is actually in that article, which you can read in, like, I think it's like a 20-minute read. Sorry.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you for that information. That's great. Okay, so just for everyone, just to put a nice button on that one, we'll try to get Sue back. Don't worry, guys. We'll make it happen. Okay, so next question. How do you control news sprawl? As in, do you have any approaches for content creators? And then how do you approach it from the SharePoint end to deal with this need to take content off? Or I guess, how do you deal with it, and then do you need to take content off? So
how do you control news sprawl?
News sprawl. Gosh, most of my clients are like, oh my God, if I can only get people to publish news. So news sprawl, I guess it's a very much it depends question. It's probably a really good problem to have, to be honest with you. As I said, the news web parts manage themselves in terms of exposability. The real issue I find is the content is old, is no longer relevant, and then it's never deleted. That is the real problem I find with news. So that isn't a page problem, it is a governance problem. And we do need to think about that. So one large organization in which I worked, they were publishing all their corporate news from a single site, and they made an executive decision to do two things. Number one is if a news article referenced a document, they looked at the document and said, is this article just for is the document just for the news article? In which case they stored it in a particular library. We'll call it a temporary news document library. And if the document was a permanent document, that document would always be stored in whichever site it made sense to keep it in, very rarely the corporate news site, and it would just be a link. We would just include a link in the news article, and then every 18 months, they deleted all the news that was older than 18. So every month you delete anything that's 18 months or older. That is a governance decision.
Did they automate that?
They did not. It's the same client you and I are working on together.
Okay.
But again, because it was easy to do when all the news is in one site, you could 100% automate this and go across all of your sites and delete all the news articles older than 18 months. Now, you're going to get content that really shouldn't be deleted. So you have to think about, well, gee, should we have metadata that says don't delete me? Or that one way to deal with that, by the way, is because you have a whole records issue, and is news a record? And how does that all play? And so one way to manage that is that you put the content wherever it's supposed to be in a permanent location, and the news article is just an article about that content. So for example, you have a new policy about working from home that resulted from COVID-19. The policy is a policy, and it's probably a permanent policy. It should be stored in the policy center. The news article that you write about it should not have the detail. It should have a summary of the policy, but not the entire policy. The policy lives in a permanent location. That way, the news article can be deleted. The policy should get managed with the way all policies are, which is at whatever review cycle is appropriate for policies. So you write the article about the event, but the event is someplace else. And that's another way to kind of make it safer to manage news sprawl. Also, it will help you not have content that is going to be expirable or not relevant in your news article, because it's just about something in a temporary moment in time. It's news. I mean, literally news, not meant to be a permanent description of something.
Sounds like we need to be able to expire content.
Yeah. Although, again, anything you do to automate governance is always going to have someone who goes, oh, no, not my stuff. It has to stay forever.
Microsoft needs to fix this problem. If I can schedule content, I should be able to schedule having it removed.
Yeah, when they first introduced the whole page scheduling thing, everybody said there should be an expiration date as well.
Yeah.
But it's non-trivial because, here's the thing. So here's one of the things that's really sucky about pages. If you delete the page, what is not deleted on your behalf is the folder in Site Assets where the images that you put on that page are stored. I'm not sure when you delete a page, how would you know if you can delete that? Because what if another page is referencing that same image? If you delete the folder where those images live, that other page is going to have a broken link. So it's a little complicated, but what happens now is you could delete all those news pages, and yet in the Site Assets library, you have a folder, a folder called Site Pages, and in that folder, there is a subfolder created for every single page. And if you rename the page, it does not rename the folder, so matching those up is sometimes complicated. But if you delete the page, the folder, which is really a subfolder, is still going to exist. And so now the question is, how do you match that up to delete, and do you care? And so again, it's a governance decision, but it's just something to be aware of.
A question that we often get, and I'll just ask it for maybe the few that might also be thinking, if you create a news page, you publish it, you edit it, you publish it, you edit it, you publish it. So in a sense, you have multiple versions. If you unpublish the news page, does it just revert to the previously published version, or does it unpublish the page? It removes the page from being findable.
I think I know the answer to this. I've tested this, but I'm not positive that my test is still right. Do you know the answer?
I talked to one of the PMs at Microsoft about this, and I didn't get a solid answer.
So I'm going to have to test it again, but I believe that if you go to Site Pages and click Unpublish, it will unpublish the entire page.
That's
no matter
my understanding as well. Yes.
And that I did test. If the page has only been published once and you unpublished it, it's very clear to you that the page is unpublished because the version will be 0. something.
Yep.
The problem is when you do the unpublish, the way I just told you to do it, which is you go to the pages library and you click the unpublish, do the ... and then you click the unpublish, you will not know whether it is just temporarily so let's say now it says 3.3. What you won't know is 3.0 visible to everyone,
Yeah.
or is the entire page unpublished? In my test, if I remember correctly, the entire page was unpublished, but you would never know that.
Yeah, I hadn't
And
thought
so-
about the last part, but the first part, yeah, that's my understanding as well.
But the UX, so knowing that you've got now you've created a page that you unpublished, you know what I mean? Because you publish it, unpublished, whatever. That part that you, unfortunately, that is a sucky user experience because you don't really know what does the end user see. So this is my other ask. I've been asking for this forever. I need a view that allows me to impersonate a reader on a site in which I am an editor or an owner, so that I can fully be assured of what they see. So
Sue, calling it how she sees it. I'm not going to call you a Microsoft shell, for sure. It's honest feedback, which I'm
not the only one who wants that, right? I mean,
exactly. No, I completely agree with you. So then, do you support, or would you support at all, the updating the pages library to have a site column for your own unpublish date that could be set as metadata, then creating workflows to help you unpublish when things expire?
Yeah, I mean, I do it not for unpublishing, but for delete. I do it for not showing. Like, in other words, I take it out of the view. That I can do easily. But yeah, sure. I think, yeah.
So there's ways potential that might meet the level of governance that Sue,
yeah, but you know what?
Yeah,
I mean, again, I have like all kinds of identities in Edge and in Chrome, and I have to log in. You know, I have to switch to one of those identities to make sure something is completely unpublished. I hate, like, it's a pain in the neck to do that.
Well,
and many site owners are not. I mean, in order to do that, you have to know how to create an alternate identity, a profile in Edge or Chrome. And we've had a lot of difficulty at our large client of teaching people how to do that. The IT, we have no problem because we do this all the time, but it's not an intuitive thing for most users, and they wouldn't necessarily think to do it. We all have to do it because we're consultants and we have a million client identities, but it's not a natural act if you work in a company.
Or the one still stuck on I-11.
Or that. Or that.
All right, we have a few more questions, so please, Michael, keep us in line.
Let me start. Yeah, let me start with a comment. This person, unfortunately, I think is not had to leave, but they wanted to say thank you so much for an enlightening presentation. There were so many topics I had not considered and will be implementing moving forward. So, thank you, thank you, Sue. And then the next question I've got is: does alt text get considered in the Work tab on Bing Search or potentially in Project Cortex?
That is a great question, and is not a question that I know the answer to.
I don't either. I'm pretty sure it is. I'm pretty sure alt text is considered by most search engines, but I can't tell you if Cortex actually addressed that or not.
Yeah, that would be a great question for all the AMAs that they have about Project Cortex. I don't think, I wonder if is alt text addressed in search engines?
Normally, yes. By Microsoft Search would do it because it's important text. It's important context. I mean, it describes what an image is. So most search crawlers would take that into account. I don't know if like Google would, but I would think that Bing search related to the enterprise should take that into account. But I just don't know.
What about you? Have you tested it with SharePoint search? Because I've never done that.
A long time ago, absolutely. But it definitely pulled it up. But recently, in all the changes that are happening around Microsoft Search and Graph, I actually don't know, but I'm pretty sure it would be.
Okay, I'm going to test that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Ooh.
There's a blog post there.
It's a really, really good question. Very topical to what we're talking about. It should. I would like it to work. I'm going to cross my fingers.
It's so important for so many things. And a comment just came in. Thank you for the person who submitted it. That, I mean, screen readers need that kind of content. The alt text is extremely important for accessibility. So I'm pretty sure it is. Like Google will kind of ignore some of that if you're trying to spam their index, but enterprise search engines and indexers, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, Sue's right. You'd have to test it. I can't tell you for sure that it is there.
Gotcha. There you go. Well, that is the end of the questions that I have so far. Eric, any other questions for
I have
our
some, and it's always fun. So when you said quick links, what's your recommended like wording around that instead of quick links?
I would never call the web part quick links. In fact, I would.
People, they'll have the quick links up on their portals and whatnot. Like they'll call it quick links. What would you? What are some good recommended terms you have for that?
Frequently needed.
Okay.
Most popular, if that's really what it is. It's mostly, I think, what people really mean is frequently needed. I just hate the term quick. What? The other ones are slow? The other one I can't stand. Useful links? What? The other links are not useful? Well, I mean, every link should be useful. Otherwise, you know, I'm not going to ask people when they're designing pages to go all Marie Kondo and say, oh, do you spark joy? But I do want you to say, do you belong on my site? Are you relevant? Do you mean something to me? So that label is a promise breaker. So one of the most important concepts about link labels is that every link is a promise. And there's a quote from Jerry McGovern, who's a well-known information architect, is, you know, if links were married, they'd mostly be getting divorces. They'd mostly getting divorced because they never keep their promises. And so quick links is a promise breaker. Useful links, that's just, come on. I think we can do better. Call the links what they really are. Group them in a meaningful way so I can scan your page and know what I'm linking to. Useful links is not useful to your reader. You need to know who that reader is when you're creating a site for them. You need to know what their top tasks are. So group the links by task. Group the links by action. Call it the label for the links. Call it by the action that people need to do.
Sure.
Useful is not an action. Quick is not an action. And if it's not quick, go back and check what's breaking the performance, because, yeah. So,
as I've heard you say many times, words matter.
Words matter. Yeah. Labels matter. I mean, this is really about, you're making, again, that the concept of thinking about a label as being a promise that you're making to the reader is really critically important. Everything I do as an information architect is in service of the reader of my page. And I really do. I don't have to do the whole sparking joy crap, but I do have to think about that concept. It, you know, does this concept, does this label not spark joy, but does it, you know, help people get to what they want to? Is it clear? Is it meaningful? Have I tested it? Because again, the one thing that we know is not true is that you can have more than 3 clicks and things aren't going to fall apart in your architecture. But if you are not minimizing the time that it takes for someone to get to their destination, they are not going to like your site and they're not going to get value, and you will be costing the organization time, energy, and money. So what you really do want to think about is what label keeps that promise, and is it clear and meaningful and helping the reader get to the next step in their journey. And so it's critically important for everybody. It's even more important for people who use a screen reader. So, you know, what I love about these accessibility tips is they don't just apply to people who have some kind of impairment that requires that they use a screen reader or they have to put on their glasses in order to see their monitor. These are really good tips for everyone, and that's what makes them inclusive. That's what makes it's not hard to add alt text, because that's going to help your readers who are getting your content on a slow connection. So all of these things are about making, you know, treating the people who come to your site as people and respecting their time and energy, and trying to make the content as personal and accessible as you can for them.
I mean, that sums up the whole talk so well. That's so important.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
With that, we're at the end of our time. Sue, thank you so much for bringing us this session today. This is going to be the cornerstone of our lexicon of webinars for years to come. Just thank you. This has been a really great session. Eric, thank you as well for your input here as well. But Sue, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone who's still on here, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hang out with us, learn a little bit about accessible content. If you liked what you saw, we're here every month. Next month, we're going to be talking all about user adoption. Eric Overfield over here will be doing that session. If you want your employees to adopt and continue to engage your SharePoint sites, you have to build something they're going to want to use, right? So in this session, we're going to be looking at uncovering some your users' needs and understanding the role user interface and user experience plays in user adoption, and talking about 10 steps to design a SharePoint portal that your users are going to want to use. So that's next month. That's July 30th. You'll see it all in the emails that we send out. Anyway, thank you again so much, everyone. You see Sue's information up there. If you have any further questions, hit her up on Twitter, send her an email, send her a smoke signal, stalk her website. She's so excited to answer questions and talk with people. If you need anything from Eric and I, you can find us pixelmill.com, at PixelMillTeam on Twitter. And that's it from me. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your Thursday. And we'll see you all down the road. Take it easy, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye, all.